This video takes a look at Module 2, Lesson 1, opposite quantities combined to make 0. So today you guys are going to add positive integers by counting up and negative integers by counting down. You will also be able to identify when and why numbers are additive inverses. So additive inverses is a new vocabulary term you'll be introduced to today. You know you have this lesson and this content when you are able to add positive integers and identify the sum of additive inverses. And our standard is 7NSA1A. Describe situations in which opposite quantities combine to make 0. All right, so lesson 1 is opening with an exercise. So you guys are going to do this. You're going to use this graphic organizer below to write what you know about positive and negative numbers. And then I'm going to give you, after you've done this, a few statements that I came up with to add to your Venn diagram. So just remember how the Venn diagram works. The information that matches negative numbers goes on this side, positive numbers goes on this side, and if it deals with both, you can put it in the middle. So go ahead and try to come up with as much as you can, fill out the Venn diagram as much as you can, then come back and check the video before moving forward. All right, so I scrolled down a little bit, and this is the information that I have in my Venn diagram. So negative numbers are to the left of 0 on a number line and get smaller going to the left, because the further left on a number line you go, the smaller the value is getting. Some terms that represent negative numbers, loss, drop, decrease, or below 0, they look like this with negative signs in front, and they are the opposites of positives. For positives, they're right to the 0 on a number line and get larger by going to the right. Some terms could be gain, increase, above sea level. They do not have a sign usually, or you can put a plus in front of them, but all numbers are considered positive if there's no sign, and they are opposites of negatives. Now, both numbers can be on a number line. Also, maybe you have something about being able to use absolute value to calculate both of their distances from 0. But these are just, 9 things that are listed in the Venn diagram. You can have more. So we're going to use this number line to practice some counting up and counting down. Now, if you count up starting at 0, this is going to correspond to a positive number, because positive numbers are to the right of 0, and that's what we're talking about when we're counting up. So obviously, counting down will represent negative numbers. So and I'm going to do some examples here. If I start here and I want to count up 3, you would go 1, 2, 3. You end up at positive 3. Whereas if I counted down 3, you would end up 1, 2, 3 down here at negative 3. So counting up would represent a positive, and counting down would represent a negative. So let's do another example. Let's try negative 7. So if we wanted to count to negative 7, you would start at 0. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that's counting down by negative 7. So if I just use this example, a negative 7 is 7 units to the left of 0. Now, the absolute value of negative 7 is 7, because negative 7 is 7 units from 0 on a number line. Make sure we make those distinctions, right? There's a difference between absolute value and just the number's value by itself. Now, I'll use a different color. If I want to count up to positive 7, you would start at 0. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, and I'll write this in green font. A positive 7 is 7 units to the right of 0. And the absolute value of positive 7 is 7, because 7 is 7 units away from 0 on a number line. Okay? So that's just a few examples. If you want to practice counting up and down for a few more, you can feel free to do so. So where do you begin when you are locating numbers on the number line? You always start at 0. Okay? 0 is that starting point, as you saw with our examples with 3 and -3, and 7 and -7. What do you call the distance between a number and 0 on the number line? Absolute value. Okay? Absolute value, keep in mind, is always positive because we're just talking about how far is a number from 0. And then what is the relationship between 7 and -7? So think back to some 7th grade or 6th grade vocabulary. They are opposites because they are equidistant from 0, but in opposite directions. Okay? Now you can also say they have the same absolute value because absolute value is measuring that distance from 0. All right, so example number 3 is going to have us play what is called the integer game. Now, before we get started, I'm going to color coordinate these for you guys. This will help when I'm explaining things. So this first card is going to be red. This second card will be green. This will be blue. And this will be purple. Okay? Now, what we're trying to do is we are trying to find the sum of the values. So remember, we are adding. We are going to use the counting on method in order to solve this. So this first term, we're going to start with this 5. So this means, and I'm actually going to draw a full arrow over here just to help with some room. So what this 5 means is we are going to start at 0 and end up at positive 5. Okay, so I'm going to take my pen, and you guys should be looking at your number line. You're starting at 0, and you're ending up at positive 5. That would be 5 units to the right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So now I am here. Okay, I am done with this card. I'm going to move to my next card, which would mean I'm going to use some green here. Okay, so this second card, and I'm just going to write it a little bit over. What this is going to tell me, start at where the previous card ended, which is at 5, and count 5 units to the left. Okay, that a little bigger. So I am going to start at where the previous card ended, which is at 5, and I'm going to count 5 down or to the left. So I'm here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It seems like I'm back at 0. Now, looking at my next card, which I'll write right here, that is a -4. So what that is going to tell me is I'm going to start at where the previous card ended, which was at 0, and count 4 units to the left. Left because that 4 is negative. So let me take my blue. I'm from here, 1, 2, 3, 4. I am at -4 now. And now let's finish with this last card, which I'll write over here. And I'll make sure it's in purple so you guys can match here. I'm going to once again start at where the previous card, and I'm going to add card in here, ended, which seemed to have been -4, and count 8 units to the right. Now I'm counting to the right because 8 is positive. So let me take my pen, and I'm going to go from here, and I'm going to count 8 to the right. Now I'm going to go underneath just because of room. So I'm here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I ended up at 4. So because I'm at 4 and I am done counting up or counting down, that is my final position on the number line, meaning that is going to be my answer to the sum of these numbers. So the answer here is 4. The final position is 4. Now, I am going to show you before we move forward and answer B and then look at number 2. I'm going to show you this number line in a few different ways that are a little bit neater. So those will populate on your screen in 1 second. So what you'll see pictured here is a much neater, I'll be fair, number line that is depicting the same situation. So we started at 0, right? That's our origin, that's our starting point. And then we counted 5 units up because the first card is a positive 5. So we're at 5. Then we are starting our second card at where our first card left off, which is 5, and we are counting down or to the left 5 because this 5 is a negative. So now we got back to 0. Then the third card is negative 4, so we start where that previous card left off, which is now 0, and we are counting down or to the left 4. That got us to negative 4. And then our final card is a positive 8, so we once again finish from where the previous card left off and count up 8, and we ended up at a positive 4. Additionally, you can look at it like this. So our red arrow is first, so we started at 0, went to 5. From there, the blue arrow is next. We went back to 0 because we went 5 to the left. Then the green arrow is next. You went from 0 to negative 4, and then the black arrow going from negative 4, 8 over to positive 4, which is our final resting spot. So either of these two number lines are depicting the same situation, and if we go back, this also depicts that same situation. Now we can continue answering the questions here. What card or combinations of cards would you need to get back to 0? So we are currently at we end up at positive 4. So what would you need to get back to 0? You would need a negative 4. Or you can combine and make it negative 1 and a negative 3. Or you could do negative 2 and negative 2 back to back. All of those would get you back to 0, okay? Because if you're at 4, you need negative 4 in order to get back to 0 or some combination that would add up to negative 4. Now, exercise 2 is going to allow us to look at this term called the additive inverse. Now, remember, that is part of your goal for this lesson is to understand what it is, when it's present, and why, what situations apply to additive inverses, okay? So our first question here asks, how far is 7 from 0 and what direction? So I'm starting from 0. I'm getting to 7. That is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Some of you are probably getting pretty intuitive with this. Like it's pretty straightforward. But the practice helps build that strong foundation. So it is 7 units to the right of 0. All right. It's a positive number. We're counting to the right. Now, the opposite of 7 is going to be 7 going in the opposite direction. So we're starting here and we're going 7 units, but we're going the opposite direction. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So if you're asking what is the opposite of 7, the opposite of 7 is negative 7. Okay? How far is negative 7 from 0 and in what direction? Negative 7 is 7 units from 0. Or let me write it like this. It is 7 units to the left of 0. Okay? So the only difference between 7 and -7 is the direction you're heading on your number line. So I want you to try D through G here independently. So read these questions, answer them, and come back and check the video before we move forward. All right, so if we're looking at D here, what would we do if we had 7 and then -7? You would start at 0 and count up 7 by moving to the right. Then I would count down from 7 to 0. Okay? This 7's positive, so you would go from 0 to +7. This -7 is negative, so you would leave from where the previous card left off and go down 7 to 0. So what does this tell us about 0 and the opposite? So this tells us this. 7 plus -7 equals 0. These are called additive inverses. Okay? Numbers that are opposites will always add to 0. Okay? This is the term additive inverses that we're looking for through this lesson. The sum of 7 and its opposite will always get 0. Additive inverses get 0. So 2 and -2, 4 and -4, so on and so forth. Those are called additive inverses. All right, now F, the curved arrow or the arrows from 7 and -7. The arrows are the same distance from 0, just in the opposite directions. Okay? Now, do you think this will hold true for any number and its opposite? Hopefully you came up with the conclusion, yes, because when you start at 0 on the number line and move in one direction, moving in the opposite direction the same number of times will always take you back to 0. Okay? So any opposite numbers will always add to get 0. And that's what is mentioned here in this box. For any number A, there is a number -A, or the opposite of A. So A plus the opposite of A will get 0. And it's also true for the other way around, okay? This is called additive inverses. When you are adding opposites, you will always get 0. That is called additive inverses. Please make sure you're adding that term to your vocabulary bank. All right. We are not going to, obviously, in this video, play the integer game, so we are going to move forward into the lesson summary. You add a positive number by counting up, and a negative number by counting down. Up meaning right, down meaning left. An integer plus its opposite is a 0. The opposite of a number is called the additive inverse because the two numbers sum to get 0. Okay? So go through, answer these problem set questions. When you are done, check your answers, and that will be it for this first lesson of Module 2. So for 1A, to get to a sum of -12, there's a large amount of possible answers here. -7 and -7 would get you to -12. Any two negatives that add together to get -12 work. So -8 and -4 would work. -10 and -2 would work. -9 and -3 would work. There's a lot of different ones. But you should have two negatives because you would start at 0, move 6 to the left, and another 6 to the left. That gets you to -12. Okay? -9 and -3, you would move 9 to the left, and then another 3, that gets -12. All right, now if I add 2 more cards, but the total sum of the cards remains at -12, you added 2 opposites to your hand. So we're at -12, correct? So if you want to stay at -12, you need 2 cards that will essentially take you in one direction and then take you right back the same amount. So -2 and 2, 4 and -4, 5 and -5, 10 and -10, 3 and -3. Those opposites basically cancel out the distance you're moving. So you're right back at negative 12. All right, number 2 is also dealing with a lot of answers would vary. But elevation, this is an example of a real world problem where we're dealing with additive inverses. So a scuba diver is 20 feet below sea level and rows 20 feet to get back to the boat, right? That's a negative 20 and then a positive 20. Those are additive inverses. He's getting back to his boat, which represents that starting point. For money, once again, the answers will vary. If the bank charges a $5 fee and then you make a deposit of $5, that is a negative 5 and a positive 5. Those are additive inverses that end up getting 0. Okay? C, above and below 0 degrees. So the temperature for one room is 5 degrees above. The temperature for another room is 5 degrees below. Finding the sum of both temperatures would get 0. Those are, once again, additive inverses. And then D for football, if we gain 25 yards and then lose 25 yards, those are additive inverses. That would also get 0. Okay? Now, moving down, 3, we have H and K. They are the same distance from 0. So that tells me these are opposites because they're equidistant from 0 on opposite sides of 0. So writing an equation to represent H plus K is 0 because their absolute values are equal, but their directions are opposite. Or you could put they're just opposite numbers, so therefore they get 0. K is the additive inverse of H, and H is the additive inverse of K, because they're the same distance from 0. Therefore, their sum is 0, because additive inverses have a sum of 0. I really want encouraging you guys to use this term additive inverses heading forward in your explanations. 4, during a football game, Kevin gained 5 yards. So that's a positive 5. He lost 7 yards. That's where you get this negative 7. How many yards does Kevin have to get on the next play to get them back to where they started? They must gain 2. If you count up 5 and then down 7, you're at negative 2. So to get back to 0, you need to go 2 up. So that's a positive 2. Okay, so he must gain 2 yards. And here is the work to show. Number 5 here, the red arrow is what happens first. So we're starting at 0. And the reason I know, by the way, the red arrow is what started first is because the arrow at the end, so the fact the arrow's here is where you ended up. If you thought the black one started first, the black one starts here at 5. Okay, and we know numbers originate from 0. So we're starting at 0, and it looks like we went to 10. So that's a positive 10. So we're starting with 10. Then the green is what came next, because the green is then starting at where our first value ended. So we are at 10, and we counted 5 to the left. So that is adding a negative 5. Then the black arrow here finishes things off. So we're at 5, and we're counting 5 more to the left. So that is another plus negative 5. And our answer here is 0, because that's where this ends up. So, just going back to the expectations for this lesson, at this point, you guys should now know how to add positive integers, or positive and negative, sorry about that, integers, through the use of counting up and counting down. And you should be able to also identify sum of additive inverses as always being 0. If you are able to handle those 5 problem set questions with relative ease, you have mastered this lesson.